Okay, before we define anything within this index method, which is going to handle this request, let me take you to the browser so that I can show you what has happened. Because remember, we commented out and then deleted one route, which was taking us to the category view, which we have created in the very first video. Let me take you back. This one. So we had a route defined over here where we were returning admin.category view. But now since we have deleted this route, and over here it's saying for this path there is no page found, because we have actually deleted the route. Page is still there, or rather the view is still there, but because we have deleted the route, so the router looked at all the routes which are currently defined in the file, and it tried to match this URL one by one with all of the URLs defined over here. And since it didn't match anyone, so it returned 404 page. Okay, now what we are going to do is that we have to define different views for all of these actions. So let's go to our, where is it? Over here. So within this admin folder, we are going to create another folder named category. And all the pages which are going to be related with the category are going to be present inside this category folder. So let me move this category.blade.php file within this category folder. Okay, now let's go to category controller and let's simply return view. Now this time the view is coming from inside the view folder. There is a folder named admin, and within this folder there is another folder named category, and there we have a file named category.blade.php. So we want to return this view. So now let's refresh, and it's still not working. I remember. Okay. That is because we have actually changed the route from category to categories, plural. Okay, so we are getting the same page, but now this page has been associated with the index action, so it's better to change the name of that blade file to reflect that action. So I'm going to rename this page. Let's go down. Okay, let's rename to index.blade.php, and over here let's change it to index as well. Okay, now we have to change the contents of this page. So rather than displaying this static text, we want to get all the rows in the categories table displayed over here. So for that, within this index action or method, first of all we need to get those rows from the table, the categories table. And to get those rows from the categories table, we have to access its model. So we need to define a variable which is going to represent new category. Now it's saying this type is undefined, so let's import the class which is app models category. Okay. Now let's make it singular category because this is representing the object, category object. Now let's define another variable, categories equals category, and since we are interested in all of the rows in the table, so therefore we are chaining it with one of the methods provided through eloquent model, that is all. So this is going to return all the rows in the categories table. Now this variable categories contains a collection of rows which are currently present in the categories table. All we have to do is that we have to make sure this view has access to this data as well. So to do that, we have to connect this data with this view. And there are different ways you can connect this data with the view, or you can provide data to the view. One of them is attach another parameter which is an array, and you can get any index. Let's suppose, so the index is categories and its value is this variable categories. So this is one way. Now since this is an array, that means you can attach any more elements to this array as you want, and that will contain the data that you want to send as well. But currently, since we have just categories to attach, so let's delete it. Okay. Now this index.blade.php has access to this categories data. Now let's go to this index page. And underneath this paragraph, let's display everything which we have currently in the categories on the browser. So we cannot, so over here we are accessing the key that we have attached, and this is the key. So this becomes a variable name in the index.blade.php. So we have to attach $sign because this is now a variable, and this name has to match with this key, not the value. But in our case it's the same, key and value both have same names. Okay, now since this is a dynamic data, and had this been a normal PHP, we would have attached echo to it. But since we are using Blade directives, so instead of using the echo, we can enclose it within 2 curly brackets, and this will convert it into echo behind the scenes. Now let's go to the browser and see if we are able to receive this data. Now as you can see, this is the heading and this was the paragraph, and we have 3 more rows. First one has ID 1, the name is women, status is 1, second is ID 2, name is men, status is 0, third is ID 3, name is boys and status is 3. So that means we are able to receive all the data in our browser. So let's remove this extra paragraph and change the H1 to all categories. Okay. All categories. Now even though we are able to see all the categories in the browser, but as far as the front end user interface and styling is concerned, there is a lot we still need to do. But let's put this front end related stuff at the back burner, and let's go back to our index method and apply some more tidying up. Okay, so before we work on show, let me tell you another way where you can attach the data with any view. So when you have the key and the variable name, when they both are the same, so you can go for the shorter version, which is replace this array with another function called compact, and over here you just write a string categories. This compact method will take this string and convert it into an associative array with the key named categories, as well as its value being a categories variable, which will match this one. So you have to make sure whatever name you have given over here, you provide the same one over here, so that it gets expanded into same associative array that we previously had. Just to give you a clue that this one still works, let's go one more time to our browser and refresh it, and we are still able to see the data. Okay, so the tidying up that we are going to apply over here has something to do with Laravel's very integral concepts, and those concepts are type hinting and dependency injection. I'm going to very superficially explain what type hinting and dependency injection is. So let's start with the dependency injection. So basically, if you notice over here in this very first line in the index method, we are creating an instance of type category. So this category is a class on which our index method depends upon. Without this category object, the index method will not perform its duty or what it's supposed to do. Therefore, we are creating an instance of category over here, but this is creating a type coupling between what index method is supposed to do and this category object. The whole job of this index method is to go to this categories database table, extract all the rows in that table, and return it back in this view to the front end. But on top of that, we are making index to do one more job, that is create an instance of type category. Ideally, this category should have been already made available to this index method, and index method should have straight away used it to extract all the rows from there and send it to the front end. But instead, we have made index method depend on something external. Without that something external, the index method cannot perform its job. So we have created a dependency for this index method. Now what dependency injection can do for us is that we just somehow hint in the definition of this index method that it needs an object of type category, and then Laravel will create it for us. When this index method executes, an object of type category will already be available for index method to utilize. Index method itself doesn't have to create a new instance. This is called dependency injection. So that means we won't be needing this line of code. So how can we let Laravel know to inject a dependency, namely an object of type category, into this index method? Well, for that we are going to use parameters and type hinting. So basically, let's create an object of type category. Now this is a parameter which is being passed to the index, but this is not enough. we have to somehow let Laravel know that this object or this variable is an instance of type category. So for that we are going to type in it with the correct data type, which is category. Now just by passing an object of type category to this index method, we have informed Laravel that this index method depends on a dependency which is an instance of type category. So what Laravel framework will do, it will create an instance of type category on the index method's behalf, something like this, somewhere behind the scenes, and it will inject that new object that has been created over here. We don't need to do anything else except that pass a parameter and type in it with the correct data type. And then we can simply utilize this object by calling a method all on this object, and this will return us a collection of categories that is going to be stored in this variable categories, which is being sent along the view like this, and the job is done for us. Now in order to test this out, let's go and verify in the browser, refresh, and we are still able to see all the categories. But if you notice over here, we haven't created an object of type category anywhere, and yet we have still managed to access and display all those categories in the browser. That's because just by typing in the parameters, we have informed Laravel that this index method depends on a dependency and you have to inject it for us. And Laravel did all the work for us. Okay, now this part is done. So now we know what is type hinting and what is dependency injection. Okay, so now we are done with the index method. Now we can move on to displaying just one particular row from the database table, and that row is going to be based on its primary key. So that means we need to pass some parameter over here, but what parameter? For that, let's go and visit the URL, because we did this in the previous video, so let's recall it. So this is the show method, and the URI is /categories, and then a route parameter in which the ID will go. So in the address bar, it's supposed to look something like /categories and then the ID. Let's suppose we are interested in the row with the ID 1. So when we hit enter, we should see the data over here that belongs to row whose primary key is 1. And if you change it to 2, we should see over here all the data related to row number 2. But since we haven't yet defined any methods for this, so that's why we don't see anything over here. Anyway, this part is dynamic and it keeps changing, so that means we have to pass this route parameter as a parameter to our show method. So over here we are supposed to get an ID as a parameter. Now over here we can say, again, let's start with the version where we didn't have any dependency injection and type ending. So we will start with category equals new category, an object of type new category. Then we will return a row by calling a method on category object, which is where the ID column of that category table is equal to this ID. So copy and put it over here. Now since we are comparing them for equality, so that's why we don't have to provide the equality operator, because that's the default comparison operator. However, if you wanted to compare one is greater than or less than the other, then you would have needed to provide third parameter, which is, let's say, greater than, less than or equal to any. But for equality, we don't need to provide any parameter. Now to this where clause, we have to chain another method, which is get, because even though this where clause does do the comparison, but it will not return any data back to the row. It will return a query string to which we have to append another method, which is get, so that we can actually get the data which is going to be stored in this row variable. For all method over here, we didn't need to chain any other method, because all is doing two things: does the job it's supposed to do and return the data as well. Whereas this where is just doing the job it's supposed to do, but it's not returning the result back. Whereas this get is actually returning the rows back to us, which we are storing in this row object or variable. Now let's return a view, and this view is going to be admin dot category dot show, and we are sending data along with it. So I'm using associative array to send the data because I don't want to use this row variable in the view. I want to use this category variable in the view as a variable. So that's why I'm going to change this. Okay, so now I'm sending this row, whatever is in the row, as a value to this index which is named category. Now in the show.blade.php, which we are going to create in a second, in that view we will have a variable of type category which will contain whatever data is presented in this row variable. Okay, so now let's go and create a show.blade.php file in the category folder, which is inside the admin folder, and admin in turn is inside the views folder. So there it is, views folder, admin, category. Now over here we are creating another blade view which is show.blade.php. So rather than writing show from scratch, I'm going to copy everything which is in the index.blade.php and pasting it over here in the show.blade.php. Now over here we don't have categories variable, we have access to a variable named category. Let's try to display what we have received. So now as you can see in the address bar, we have 2 in the URL and we have data belonging to row whose primary key is 2. Let's change this to 1. Now we have data belonging to the row whose ID is 1, 3, and we have the boys category. Okay, so we are able to display data for specific row in the browser as well. Now let's go and see if we can take advantage of dependency injection and type hinting and simplify our show method even further. So let's go to category controller. Okay, so far what we know about type hinting and dependency injection is that if we pass a parameter and type hint that parameter with any class name, then Laravel using dependency injection will create an object of that class for us. So that means we won't be needing to use new keyword to create an instance ourselves. So let's pass an object of type category. Now this dependency injection can do even more for us, which is if we make sure that the name that we are providing as a parameter over here matches the name that we have provided in the web routes as a route parameter. If these two names match, then what Laravel framework will do is that it will not only create an instance of type category and inject it into this method, but now the Laravel has access to whatever is the current value of that route, that is ID 1, 2 or whatever it is. So now Laravel can make the connection that this number that we are seeing over here is actually a primary key in the categories table. So what Laravel will do, it will not only create and inject this object, but it will go to the database and access that row whose ID matches the one provided over here as well. So that means we don't have to do this second thing as well, and we simply have to pass what we have received to our view. So we have received an object of type category as a parameter, and we are passing that parameter back to the view. But now because of the dependency injection and keeping the parameter name in the show method and the route parameter name in the web route, keeping them same, the Laravel framework has done these two tasks on our behalf. Not only created an object of type category for us, but it also went to the database and looked for the row whose ID matches the ID which is provided through this parameter, and get that row and stored it back into this category variable. So now this category variable contains one specific row that belongs to that particular ID, and we can pass that to our view. Just to verify, let's go back to the browser, refresh, and we are still able to see this row whose primary key is 3. Let's change it to 2, and we are getting the row whose primary key is 2 or ID is 2. 1 and ID is 1, name is women. So even though, if you notice, in our show method, there is nothing present. We are simply forwarding whatever we have received as a parameter to our view, but when that is being displayed in the view, it contains the data that we were interested in the first place. Okay, so by now I hope you appreciate the power of Laravel dependency injection and how simplified it's going to make our code. I don't know if I have mentioned this or not, but whenever we type in our parameter with some user-defined data type, or we are using a class from some other PHP file, we have to import that file to our controller as well. Okay. Now again, as far as the front-end display of this show view is concerned, we are putting this on back burner and we are moving forward to creating and inserting a new row in the database table using our front end. So for that, we have to utilize these two methods, create and store. So to insert a new row in the table, the first request will come through this create method, which will return us a view, and that view will contain a form, and when that form is submitted, it is going to be handled by this store method. So we are going to work with these two methods for inserting a new row in the database table using the front end. So let's start with the create method. This create method doesn't do much. It simply returns a view which will contain a form for the user to fill in. So let's simply return a view which is going to be in the admin folder, there inside category folder, and there the name is create.blade.php. That's it. We are done with this create. Now let's go and actually create this view. So for that, let's go to views, and inside this categories folder, let's create create.blade.php. Okay. Now again, Ctrl+Alt, copy and paste it over here. Let's change the title. Add new category. We don't have any data over here. We are going to create a form over here. So let's give this form a class name create, and its method is going to be post because it's going to be submitted. Okay, using a post request. Now for the action, let's keep it empty for the time being, and let's define the input field. So it's going to contain two input fields through which we will provide the name of the new category, and with the second one we are going to define the status. So let's create a div label for name, input type text. The name of this input field is name. ID is also going to be name. The value is going to be typed in by the user. Then let's create another form group. Label is going to be status. And as its field, we are going to use select statement. Name is going to be status. ID is also status. And this is going to contain two option fields. So value for the first one, value is 1, and the text that is going to be displayed is active. So if we select this active, a 1 is going to be sent to the backend, and 1 means true. So that means this category is active. The second option is the value, let's put 0, and this means inactive. Now for the third form group, let's create input field of type submit. Okay. Now to display this form, we have to send a request to category/create. Now this will return as a form. Okay. So now we are getting this form. So let's put in some name, category name. Let's say, I don't think we have girls. And for the status, we have two options to select from. So let's go with the active. Now we can't submit it because there are two reasons. Number one, let's close this show.blade.php index as well. Okay. The reason we are going to run into errors is that because we haven't defined any action, that is, we haven't defined any URL where shall this form be submitted to. And the second is where it we haven't yet defined anything in the store method either, so we won't be able to submit this form. So let's work on that. First of all, let's start with the blade file. Over here we have to define the URL, so we can define something like this /. Let's start with localhost 8080 admin categories, then create. We can do that, but this means if anything changes over here, even if the port number changes over here, we will run into errors. So the other option is to do something like this, two double curly brackets, because we are going to use a helper function. Let's call a helper method which is URL, and to this we have to provide the path name, which is /admin categories and create. The starting / isn't mandatory, even we can remove it in the web routes as well. Over here we can remove this one as well. So what this URL helper function will do, this is a path name to whatever the domain name is. So currently our domain name is this part. So this URL method will take the current domain name. That means we don't have to worry about changing the port number or the domain name changing from localhost to something else. So whatever is the domain name, the URL helper method will take care of that, and then attach this portion admin categories create to it, and it will return us this URL. So that reminds me, we are not supposed to use create one because we are already there. We are supposed to use the store method. So let's change this to store. So now this request will be received by the store method when we click on the submit button. So let's go to our controller. Now over here we are supposed to accept this request. So there are two ways to accept this request. First one is to use another global variable which is called request. You can call this request global helper function to get hold of the HTTP request. To see what is being received, we can die dump it. So this DD will display whatever is in the request object into the browser and terminate the store function. So let's go and have a look. So let's put something girls active submit. The post method is not supported for route admin categories store. The supported method are get, head, fetch and delete. I wonder why. Maybe we haven't defined this route. Maybe our route is slightly different. Let's go and verify. So this is our store method. Oh, we don't need to attach / store to the URL. Okay, so let's remove this. Let's go back to the create, and in the create form let's remove this /store part. Okay, let's fill in girls again and submit. It says 419 page expired. So you get this error because Laravel by default attaches lots of safety mechanisms when a request comes in. So one of those safety mechanisms is protection against cross-site resource forgery attacks. So this is one type of security vulnerability in which any malicious user can submit a form to your application which might even destroy your whole database. So we have to make sure that if any request comes to the backend, it has been generated from our application's front end and not from any other third party. So when the request has been generated from our application or our website's front end, we can be almost certain that it's not any malicious user trying to attack our database. So for that, whenever we are submitting a form, we have to somehow identify to the server that we are part of the same application. And for that, we are going to attach a directive which is at csrf, cross-site resource forgery. So basically what happens is that this is behind the scenes going to generate a hidden field which will contain a token. When this request is submitted, that token is also submitted, and that token is going to be matched against the token which has been created when we first typed in any URL belonging to this website. So at that time a token was generated. Then every time the csrf frontend will generate a token, and this token will be matched with the value which has been stored there when we first type in any URL in the address bar. If these two tokens match, then that means this request is coming from a valid user, a genuine user. Hence Laravel will accept this request and give it to the category controller. So hopefully now we will not see this error. Now let's go back, refresh it, because we need to generate the token. Girls, submit. Okay, so now the request has been received by this backend, and it has been given to the store method, and this is what we are receiving. An object of type request, illuminate HTTP request, which contains lots of properties. The method is post. The path info is /admin/categories, and over here there are cookies, files, and other information. So let's click on this request input back. So this will contain all the input values that have been submitted to the form, and this contains an object of type parameter, an array whose name is parameters, and it contains 3 input fields: name, whose value is girls; status, value is 1, and this is underscore token, and this is the value. So this token got generated because of @csrf directive that we put in. Okay, so now we are able to receive this request. Now before we proceed any further, let's modify our form as well. So over here I'm using a helper function which is called URL. So this URL will take the current domain, and attach this portion to it. Now remember, we have given names to our routes as well, so that we don't have to actually use the current URI, because the moment we change any of the route, then we have to come back to all the places where we have used this URI and modify this URI manually. However, if in place of using URL, if we are using route names, for which we have a helper function named route, and then inside its contents, the string that we have to pass is the route name, which is category.store. Now we don't have to worry about even if we change the route, the URI over here. For example, later on, if we attach the /store to it, we don't have to come to this form and make changes over here, because now we are using route names. So we don't have to manually come back and update all the URIs. So that's the benefit of using a route helper function with route names. So let me remove this. Okay, so just to be certain that this is working, let's again submit the form. So let's again put girls and click submit, and we are still able to see the request object. That means our form was submitted successfully. So this is one change we made in the form, in the create.blade.php. Now in the category controller, so this is one way to get access to HTTP request that has been received using a request helper function. So this is a global helper function like URL and route. That means it's available throughout your application. The other way is to receive it as a parameter. So we are typing it with class request. Okay, now diagram this request object. Okay, so let's go up, and you see this is the class that we are using, illuminate HTTP request. Let's refresh it and confirm form resubmission, and again we got the form. That means we are able to access this request, HTTP request, through an object of type request as well. Okay, so both methods are fine. You can choose anyone you like. Now since I have passed this parameter, so I'm going to go with this request object. Okay, let's uncomment it, and let me show you some more methods. So if we are interested in just displaying the inputs, all of the inputs, then we will call all method on this request object, and now it will just display the input parameters, these ones. And if you are interested in just displaying one particular input value, for that the method that you have to use is called input, and pass the name. Let's suppose underscore token. Refresh, continue. So this is the token. Now let's comment this out, and now let's try to store these values. Now to store this data in the database table, we obviously need data that we have access to through this request object. And the second thing is that we need to have access to an object of type category. So we are again going to take advantage of dependency injection and ask Laravel to create an object of type category for us. So this will create an object of type category. So all we have to do is that we have to use category and a method on it called create. Now to this create object, we have to pass the data that we have received from this request object. So before we insert any data in our database table, and since we have received this data from our front end, that means some user, so it's always a good idea to validate this data before inserting it in the database in order to avoid any kind of SQL injection attacks. So therefore we are going to verify this data and store it in this data variable. And to validate this data, we are going to call a method on request object which is called validate. Now this validate method takes an array as its argument, and to this argument we can define different validation rules for all the input fields. So one input field is name, and for this we have to define different validation rules. So there are two ways to define different validation rules. One is to pass a string, and let's suppose you want to validate it against 3 different rules. So you will define the rule and then put a, what is this called? I think it's called bar key. Anyways, so this bar, then another rule, and then again bar, and then another rule. Or instead of defining the rules as a string, you can pass an array, then one rule, comma, another rule, comma, third rule. So again, it's your choice, any way you like. Okay, so for the name, I want the name to be required, and then I want this name to have minimum characters of, let's say, 4, and let's say you want the maximum characters to be 10. So these are examples of 3 different rules. Okay, then for the status, so this value is going to be present anyway because it's a drop down selection, so one value is always going to come, but let's make it an optional by passing empty string, or you can write sometimes as well. So this makes it an optional string, an optional input parameter. So that means if any request doesn't contain this value, then don't fail the validation, rather make it optional by giving it a rule which is called sometimes. So it's sometimes present and sometimes it's not present, so that makes it optional as well. Okay, now the way this validation rules works is that it will go through these validation rules one by one, and if something happens and any of the validation rule fails, then a redirect response will be automatically sent back to the user. That means our execution will not reach this point. From this point, we will automatically be redirected back to the user. So it's automatic redirection in case of validation failure. We don't need to do anything. However, if validation goes successfully, then our execution pointer will move to the next line and we will continue. So for the validation, we don't have to define anything else. However, if something happens and a redirect request is sent back from where this request comes, and then that redirect request will contain 2 pieces of information. One, the validation failure errors, those will be part of that response. And number 2, the input values that user typed into different input fields, they will also be sent back along with that redirection request, because let's suppose the form that you have submitted, in that form there were 15 input fields and the validation failed for one of those input fields. The rest of the fields contain valid data, correct data. So if due to validation failure for one of the input fields, the user is again redirected back to the form, then he has to type in all of those 15 fields. This is annoying and many of us will give up at that point. So what this Laravel framework does is that the automatic redirect that it sends back, in that response, it not only contains the error messages, but also the values that user typed in when it submitted the form. So in this way, we can define logic in our views which automatically fills those input fields which contains correct data. We don't have to force user to retype all of the input fields. So those 2 pieces of information will be sent along with that redirect response. Now these 2 pieces of information is sent in the session and it's called fetching the data. Why it's called flashing the data? Because it's only available there for only that redirect request. So once the response is sent back to wherever the request comes from, as long as you are on that page, you don't refresh the page and you don't submit the page, or you move on to any next page, you will have access to these two pieces of information. The moment you move away from that page by refreshing the page or by clicking on some other link or by submitting the form, that data which was sent along with the redirect response, that data will be erased. So we call it flashing the session data. So it's only available for a very flashing moment, and second, it's sent in the session. So we are going to handle this validation failure in the front end in a moment. Right now, let's complete this insertion request. So if we reach this point, that means our data has passed all its validation rules, and now over here we contain valid data. Now what we need to do is that we have to pass this data to this create method. It's actually data, not date. Okay. Now let's try to submit the form one more time and see what happens. Continue. Now we've got an error. Add name to fillable property to allow mass assignment on app models category. If you remember in the previous video, that is the video number 3, we inserted 3 different rows in the categories table using Tinker. So Tinker is a command line interface, and using that interface we first of all created an object of type category, then we filled data in its property named name, and then we set its property named status, and only then we saved the category in the database table. So basically what we were doing is that we were individually providing the data to all of its columns, to all of the columns in the categories table. But over here we are trying to assign all of those column values in one go, because this data contains name and status. So there are 2 fields, and the other fields ID created it and updated it, they will be getting default values. But as far as these 2 columns are concerned, we are trying to assign values to 2 columns in one go. We would also be receiving this error had we have some more columns. Let's suppose column A or 1, if we had this column and we had some rules over here, then we were trying to assign 3 columns in one go. So this is the error. It's saying that by default the databases are protected against this kind of mass assignment. So this mass assignment is not allowed. If we want to allow this mass assignment, we have to set its fillable property. So let's go to our category model, and just like we have a protected property named table by default made available, we also have another property automatically made available, which is called fillable. Now this fillable is an array, and over here you are going to provide the names of the columns that you want mass assignment to be allowed. So we want mass assignment to be allowed for name and status. We don't have any more columns. Had we have more columns, we could have put those over here as well. So this is one way to disable this check. If we disable this mass assignment check, then the Laravel will not object. The other property is that we have another protected property named guarded. So in the fillable, let's put $sign. So in the fillable, we are telling the names that we want to be mass assigned, and in the guarded, you will display the names of the columns that you don't want to be mass assigned. So if this is empty, that means we don't have any column for which we do not want mass assignment to be permitted. So you can choose any of these. I'm going to go with the second one, because with fillable, the issue is if somewhere down the line when the application is up and running and I decide to add another column to this categories table, then I'll have to come back to this categories table and add that new column over here as well. However, if I've chosen to go with this guarded one and kept this array empty, so that means even if I add more columns to my categories table later on, I don't have to come here and make changes over here. Keeping the guard empty means we are not prohibiting any column from being mass assigned. So this will do for me. Refresh. We submit. Now this is saying integrity constraint violation, that is duplicate entry girls. So this is saying we already have an entry for girls in our database table. I thought we don't have. Let's have a look. Okay, I think while explaining I have inserted this new row. So we got this error which has been shown to the user. So what we can do is that we can put another constraint, and we are saying the name should also be unique. Now the thing is this unique, when we are saying this name column should be unique, then at this moment in time, this request or the Laravel framework does not know that we are going to insert this data in the categories table, because at this point in time, the Laravel framework does not know where this data will be inserted. Only here, when we are causing create method, we are letting Laravel know that insert this data in a table named categories. So at this point, since Laravel framework doesn't know, so we have to let it know by appending colon and then name of the table, which is categories. So now if we get this error, we will be redirected back to the form. See, we got redirected back to the form. However, just to give you a more clear demonstration, let's try to fill in this form one more time. So previously, when we tried to enter this new category with the name girls, we received integrity constraint violation error. This time, we won't get anything. If you notice over here, this form was reloaded. So that means a request was sent to the backend, validation failed, and we again got redirected back to this page. But we did not receive any error. Now, even though the session does contain the error message and the previous data, since we haven't defined anything in our view which will make that error message display in the browser, or to make these input fields pre-filled with those data, so we don't see anything. So in the front end, in our view, we have to make some changes which will display the error message and pre-fill the form with this data. But for the time being, let's ignore it and let's try to insert a row that doesn't exist in the database table. So let's put a category named accessories and let's change it to inactive. Submit. We again got redirected back. That means something went wrong. Yes, something did go wrong. Okay, now I know what happened. But the thing is this, I have put this maximum characters to be just 10. So accessories has characters more than 10. So that's why this rule was failing. So let's make it maximum 30 characters long. Now let's refresh it and try to resubmit it. Accessories. Okay, now we are saying this blank page. That's because we have successfully inserted a new row. However, after executing this line, framework doesn't know where to redirect the user to. And when we submitted the form, this is where we wanted the user to be redirected to. The form should be redirected to this URL, which is /categories. So /admin/categories. So that's why you are seeing /admin/categories, but over here we haven't associated any view with /admin/categories URL. So that's why the page is empty. So now all we have to do is that we have to go to categories, and now we have to return or redirect the user to another page. So since we are redirecting the user to a different view, so we are using the method toRoute, and since we are redirecting using the route name rather than the URL, so we have to provide the route name over here, which is category and show. And since this show method takes a URL parameter, which is going to be the ID, so we are attaching it as an array. So name of the route parameter in this category that show route is category, and its value is going to come from category ID. So a new row got inserted into the database, and that new row has been placed in this category object as well by Laravel. So now we are redirecting the user to category.show view, and since the URI for that view contains a route parameter, so this is the route parameter that we are providing through an array. So that's the route parameter name and that's its value. Just to give you the proof that this category has been inserted into the database table, let me refresh this, and as you can see we have accessories. We have another row with the name accessories over here. Now we have to test out the redirection part. So let's add another category. Let's add baby, set it to inactive, submit. Missing required parameter route category show. Category is missing. Okay, so basically this will return us a new category object. So let's store it into this category object again. Now hopefully this will work. Resubmit it. Baby, inactive, submit. So now you can see the ID is 11, name is baby, status is 0. Okay, so this is one way to redirect the user using toRoute. The other way is to redirect the user with redirect method, and over here we have to provide the path, which is admin categories. That's it. So if you want to go with the redirect method, you have to provide the URL. However, if you want to utilize route names, then this is the way. Since this first one is more robust, so I'm going to go with the first way, because if I use this URL path, then every time the URL path is changed in the web routes, I'll have to come back and make changes over here as well. However, using the route names is more robust. One more thing, you can actually, instead of passing the ID, you can pass the whole category over here as well, and Laravel will automatically extract the primary key and store it into this variable. Just to give you a demo, let me put, let's say, add new category home, set it to active, submit, and again it worked with ID 12, and we have been returned 0. Name is home, status 1, ID 12. Okay, so this is also working. Now let's go and work on the flash data that we will receive if our validation fails. So let's go to create.blade.php. Okay, over here we will receive two different kinds of data. Number one, error messages, and number two, previous values that user entered but validation failed and we got redirected back to this page. So let's start with this old data. So suppose, let's start with the name field. So when we get redirected back to this page because of validation failure, we want this field to be filled in with the previous data. If this is our intention, then we have to set the value attribute of input field to, we are going to use double curly brackets because we are putting some PHP code. So we are going to call another helper method called old, and this will contain string name. So this name is supposed to match the name of this input field, this one over here. And over here we are saying if we have older value of this input field name, then assign that value to this value attribute of this input field. Likewise, for the second one, now this is a select statement. So when we submitted the form the first time, and if we had selected active, then we want this active to be selected automatically. However, since this is the first value in the option, so this will be selected anyhow. Even if we had selected inactive to be the default value for this status, then when we are returned back, the active will be selected. So we have to change this thing, and that means for both of these options, we are going to put PHP statement, which is old value for status. So if this is equal to 1, and for the second one, if this is equal to 0, so this is equal to 1 and the value is 1, that means if older value is 1, then insert another attribute to this option field which is selected, otherwise keep it empty. And we, over here let's put question mark, and we have to do the same for the second one. So if the old status is equal to 1, then assign this selected attribute to this option, and if old status value is equal to 0, then assign the selected attribute to this second option. Okay, now let's go and test this out. Okay, now let's try to re-enter this women category with status inactive or 0. Okay, it's woman and status is inactive. Now because this woman is already present, so validation will fail and we will be redirected back to this page with women filled in over here and inactive selected over here. Submit, and both of these fields are already filled in. However, if we change this to active and try to submit it again, this time the active is selected because this active comes from this old value. Okay, so one part is done, that is our input fields are pre-filled with older values in case of validation failure. Now the second one is we want to display the error message that failed the validation as well. So for that we have to use another blade directive. Let's start with the input field, and after this input field we are going to use a directive which is called error, and with this one we have to provide the name of the input field whose error we are looking for. So in our case it's name, so we get an error associated with name input field. In that case we want to display a paragraph which is going to display the message. So this message is provided in the session data. We haven't passed this message from the backend to the front end. The session data makes the error message available through this variable. Okay, now likewise we have to do the same for the select statement as well. So after this select, the error and end error directive, now the name of the field in this case is status. Let's put paragraph and display the message. Okay, now fill in women. So the name has already been taken, so this is the error message that we have received. Obviously we will apply styling to this and we will turn this into a red message so it's more prominent, but that part will come when we style this page. For the time being we are done with creating a new category, and we have also handled the validation failure scenarios as well. Now we have to work on updating the data in the database table and deleting a specific row. So let's work on updating a specific row first. So for updation we are going to use these two routes. Both requires a route parameter. Okay, so first work on the edit method. When we make a request to this URI, that means we are going to inject dependency in the edit method. So let's go to our controller and go to edit. So we are going to have dependency injection per category. And now because of type hinting and dependency injection, Laravel has already at this point pulled in the row which matches the ID provided in this object. Now we have the whole row in this variable. We simply have to return it with the view which is going to update this data. So return view admin category edit, and the route parameter name is category and its value is going to come from this category object. So this will return us a view. Let's create this view. So in the categories create the view edit.blade.php. Now let's copy the create because it already contains the form. So copy, close create and edit. Let's paste everything over here. Let's change the title, update category. Now we have to change the route name from store to update because this is where the form is going to be submitted. And since this update also takes a route parameter, so we have to provide that one. Category, and we have access to this category variable because the view contains this variable. Now the thing is this, the forms we are supposed to send HTTP put or page request for updating any row, but when we are submitting the form we can only send a method value post or get, and we are interested in sending page request. So we can't put page over here because the form's method attribute does not recognize it. The form can only be sent as a get method or post method. So instead what we are going to do is that we are attaching another blade directive which is add method, and the method is going to be fetch. The form will be submitted as post. This is it, okay. But it will contain a hidden field with underscore method, which will inform the server that it's a fetch request. So this is sorted out. Let's comment it out for the time being so that you can see the error, and then we will uncomment this. Okay. Okay, now for the input fields. So this will work, but this old will only display data which is available in the session. So if in the session we have old value for name, it will be displayed over here. However, we can give it a second parameter. So if there is nothing in the session, then in that case, get the data from the category variable that has been passed along with the view. So category name. And likewise, let's put second parameter for both of them. Category status. So the value of this status will be looked in the session. If there is any data available for the status in the session, then that will be compared with this one. Otherwise, there is no data in the session, then this value will be taken from the category variable and that value will be compared with 1. Okay. And this is all that we needed to do. We don't need to do any more changes. So everything is fine. We have changed the route and provided the parameter. Okay. Now let's go to controller again, and since this is going to be accepted by this update method, so let's create a dependency for the request. Let's inject it, and this will contain all the data. So let's, for the time being, just die and dump the data that we received. Let's display all the data. We are not updating the table at the moment, only displaying what we received from the front end. Okay, so for updating any row, so we are, let's suppose we want to update the first row, the women's table. Okay, now as you can see already the data has been filled for women and inactive. Let's change the ID from 1 to 2. You can see the fields are already filled in with main and current status is inactive. Now let's try to submit it from plural to singular. Let's change this to active and submit it. Now we ran into a problem. The post method is not supported for route admin, so for route admin categories too. As you can see, we have associate fetch method for this route, and we are sending a post request. Now uncomment it. Okay, we have to go back. Main, inactive, submit. So the request got received by the update method and it's displaying all the inputs that it has received. Okay. Now we need to just save this data, but first we have to validate it. So for the validation, in fact, let's copy all of this and pass in another dependency, which is category. Now test everything that we had defined in the create. The method is, I think, update, because we are updating a certain row. Okay, now we want again to be rerouted to the show method, which displays the updated data. So this is fine as well. Okay, now let's go back, refresh, and now change it from plural to singular, then from inactive to active, submit. Okay, so we failed to update this category because we have got a validation error. The name must be at least 4 characters long and the main has 3 characters. So you must be now wondering that previously the main category had 3 characters, MEN. At that time we didn't get any error message. Why? That's because we had already inserted those rows before defining any validation rules. So those rows were already there and we are checking the validation rules at the time of creation and at the time of updation. So now when we are trying to update this row, it fails this at least 4-character long validation rule. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to change the validation rules from minimum 4 characters to 3 characters. So minimum 3. Let's change it for creation as well. Okay. Before we submit, let's refresh it. Active, submit. And now we got redirected to the show method. Okay, that's strange. We updated the mains category, but in the show method we have been redirected to first category, that is the women's one. I wonder why. Oh, that's because actually we copied everything from the store method. So when we are inserting a new row, that row is returned back as well for the creation. However, when we are updating a row, we are not returned a new row. We are only returned true or false. So in this case, since the row was updated, so it returned true. And true is represented as 1. So over here, the value becomes 1. And then when we are redirected to the show method, we are being displayed the row whose primary key or ID matches 1. So that's why we were seeing 1. So let's remove this part. And now let's try to update this category, women. And let's actually change it, because how will we know for certain that actually we are not being redirected to the first row? Let's make it 3. Now this is singular boy, make it plural boys and make it active. Submit. Now ID is 3, name is boy, status is 1. So we have successfully updated our previously inserted rows as well. Now the only thing left is deleting a specific row, and that we are holding off until our next tutorial. The reason I'll explain in the next video as well. So before we end this video, there is only one thing that I want to show you before we end this, which is let's display all categories. And if you notice over here, when we are displaying a form, we are seeing status as active or inactive. But where we are displaying all the categories, we are seeing either 0 or 1. So how can we replace this 0 or 1 with active and inactive as well? So for that, there is a concept in Laravel called mutators. So accessors and mutators are like setters and getters in other programming languages. Accessor means getter and mutator means setter. So let's go further down. So basically, when we are displaying any value of a column from the database table, in the database it's stored in certain way, but when we want to display in the browser, we want it to be changed into some other value before being displayed. If that's our purpose, that means we are trying to mutate the value which is stored in the database table. We are only mutating it in the browser, not in the actual database. So while accessing it, but before displaying it in the browser, we want to mutate the value. That's called mutator. And to define those mutators, we have to define a protected function in the model. In our case, it's category model. So in the category model, we have to define a protected function, and the name of that protected function is going to be camel case. So if the column name in the database table consists of multiple words attached together using underscore, so this is called snake case. And this is the way we define column names in the database. So if this is the column name which consists of multiple words concatenated together with underscore between them, then we have to define an equivalent function name but in camel case. So this is snake case and this is camel case. So first name becomes first name with no underscore and every second word begins with capital letter. Then it must return an object of type attribute. So attribute is illuminate, database, eloquent, cast, attribute. So this is a class. So we return an object of type attribute. And inside the body of this function, we are creating an attribute by calling static method named make on attribute, and we are returning that one. And this make method takes some parameters. So in this case, we are only defining mutator. Sorry, we are defining an accessor, not mutator. So when we are accessing a value, you provide this get keyword and then arrow function. And when you are defining mutator, that means when you want to store a value in the database, you want to transform the value typed in by the user into something else and then store that value in the database table, then you are defining a mutator. You are mutating the value given in by the user or typed in by the user. So if you are defining a mutator, you will put set over here. But we are defining an accessor. We are accessing a value. So we will use get, and this is an arrow function because this is an fn keyword attached. So this is an arrow function, and this takes in a value which is the current value of the column that we are accessing, its current value, and we are passing this to this arrow function, and this arrow function returns that value after capitalizing its first character. So we have to define something similar in the category model as well. So let's go to category. Now let's define this accessor, not mutator, accessor. Okay, it has to be a protected function, and the name in our case is status, a single word, so it's going to be the same both in the database table as well as in the model, and it is supposed to return an object of type attribute. So it's complaining, let's import the class. So import illuminate database illuminate cost attribute. Okay, so now this class has been imported, but we are still getting complaint because we are supposed to return an object of type attribute, and currently we are not returning anything. So let's change this, return attribute, call make method on it. No, spelling mistake. Okay, so now the error is gone. Now within the body of this make method, since we are accessing value, so set. Now this is an arrow function, so fn. Now let's pass in the current value, whatever is the current value of status, and it's going to return us. So if value equals, let's make it singular, 1, in that case return active, otherwise return inactive, comma. Okay, we are not setting a value, we are getting a value. Okay, refresh, nothing. Let's change this to 1. Okay, good. So 0 turns into inactive and 1 turns into active. So basically I was providing a string over here, whereas in the database the value true is stored as tiny end. Okay. So with this we end our today's video. We have defined all the actions associated with any resource except for delete, which we will cover in the next tutorial. In the meantime, if you like this video, please don't forget to comment, like, subscribe and share. Thank you so much.